The goal of this video is to provide a primer or trailer, if you will, to acquired immunity, vaccines, and herd immunity. Here we see Louis Pasteur, one of the great biologists, microbiologists, immunologists of the 19th century, who was one of the first practitioners and discoverers of vaccines. So let's take a look at the study he did. So first he developed the cholera bacteria specific to birds, chickens, known as fowl cholera. He developed or grew a bunch of cholera, and then he injected that into a population of chickens, into all the chickens. And what happened is all of these chickens died. They died from cholera. These chickens were not immune to cholera. They had never been exposed to cholera before. So I have them turning blue here. Blue's not super important, but I'm just showing them in blue to differentiate them from the white chickens I showed previously and some chickens we will look at in a minute. So once again, all those chickens that were injected with the cholera died. So then Louis Pasteur took a break. He went to Felton, California on vacation. And when he came back to his lab, he still had some of that old batch of fowl cholera. And he decided to inject it into another population of chickens. Now, keep in mind, this is a different white population of chickens that he injected previously. And those chickens turned purple. Now, truth be known, they did not turn purple. I'm just trying to differentiate the population of chickens we're talking about here. But you can see these chickens are lively, they're standing, and they're vibrant. Because these chickens that were injected with that old batch of cholera may have gotten sick, but they definitely did not die. And they did not die because over time, that cholera had weakened, or what is known as attenuated. So that weakened cholera did not kill those chickens. Now, certainly, Louis Pasteur at this point really did not know what was going on. So what he did is he developed a new batch of extremely virulent cholera. Very similar to that original batch that killed that whole population of chickens. And what he did with this new batch is he injected it into one on the right here, a new population of white chickens that had never, ever been exposed to cholera before. And he also injected it into those surviving purple chickens. Once again, the chickens aren't really purple, but these are chickens that had been exposed to that attenuated cholera. Injected both populations of chickens, and this is what we got. Those purple chickens who were administered the extremely virulent new cholera still survived. And those white chickens turned blue, not really, but they died because they had never, ever been exposed to cholera before. They had acquired no immunity to cholera, whereas these purple ones had been exposed to the attenuated version of cholera. They had adapted to it. They may have gotten sick. They didn't die, and they developed immunity to it. So once they were exposed subsequent to that, with this strong virulent batch, it did not harm them. As a matter of fact, it didn't even make them sick. That was one of the early forays into vaccines. Now, here is a very interesting case. This gentleman right here was a slave during the colonial times in the early 18th century, known as Onesimus. But I'm going to read to you from a book about Onesimus. And this book is called Stamped from the Beginning. It's by Ibram X. Kendi. It's a recent book, published 2016. So this is an excerpt from the book. A Boston slaveholder asked a slave, "Have you had smallpox?" And I should stop here and just say that was a common practice because smallpox in the early 1700s was wreaking havoc on the colonial U.S., on both the white people and the indigenous peoples of colonial America. And so once again, the slaveholder asked his new slave, "Have you had smallpox?" And this was asked to Onesimus. And he replied, "Yes and no." He explained how in Africa before his enslavement, a tiny amount of pus from a smallpox victim had been scraped into his skin with a thorn, following a practice hundreds of years old that resulted in building up healthy recipients' immunities to the disease. This form of inoculation, a precursor to modern vaccination, was an innovative practice that prevented untold number of deaths in West Africa and on disease-ridden slave ships to ports throughout the Atlantic. Predates Louis Pasteur. So understanding or practicing immunology in some facet has been around for quite a while. And that brings me to herd immunity. And certainly a lot of us have heard of herd immunity as of late due to a virus known as severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2. And so I'm going to explain here how herd immunity works. I haven't worked out these numbers specifically, but this will suffice. So we see roughly 25 individuals on this slide. The brown individuals are immune to the pathogen, to the virus or the bacteria. So let's just pretend for a moment we're not dealing with SARS-CoV-2. So the brown individuals are immune to whatever pathogen we're talking about. The blue individuals have been infected by that pathogen. And the white individuals have never been exposed. So what can happen is that pathogen, virus, whatever it is, can easily spread in this depiction to all of these individuals who have never been exposed. They have never developed any sort of acquired immunity to this virus. So these three individuals immediately got exposed to this infected blue individual. This one eventually becomes infected, spreads it to this one, and this just spreads like wildfire throughout the population. Now, if we look at a different population where the majority of the population is immune. So as we see in this population, the majority of individuals are brown, which denotes that they are immune to this virus or pathogen. And we have a number of infected individuals here. And in white, we have individuals who have never been exposed. The first question one may pose is, how did these brown individuals become immune? So they could have become immune two ways. They could have become immune by being exposed directly to the virus, or they could have received vaccinations, and certainly that's another way of exposure, but it's exposure to the attenuated version of that virus or pathogen. So now, with the majority of the population, and herd immunity needs to be roughly 70% of the population, now the ones that are infected hopefully are not going to come in contact with those that have never been exposed. Now, why would someone not want to get a vaccine? People with compromised immune systems, that is young, that is old. If we're talking about SARS, coronavirus 2. It could be those with respiratory illnesses like asthma, emphysema, what have you. So those individuals, young, old, compromised immune systems, may not want to get the vaccine. But if everyone else becomes immune, either naturally or through a vaccine, then it's going to be tough to spread that pathogen to those that have never been exposed. So in this depiction right here, this individual is going to be hard pressed to spread this pathogen to other individuals, mainly because these individuals around this blue person are all immune to it. And that's the case right here. That's the case right here, over here. I have been somewhat realistic in suggesting that there are going to be some individuals that are exposed. So maybe these two individuals will get exposed, but they will not be able to spread it to others because there's a perimeter here of individuals that have immunity. And maybe this individual will become exposed. And that's the whole basis for herd immunity. Really to protect those that have compromised immune systems or are susceptible to getting sick. Now, one thing I do want to mention and back up and talk about Louis Pasteur again. He was the first person to use a vaccine on an organism that had already been infected. He actually gave the rabies vaccine to an individual who had been bitten by a rabid dog. So the individual had already acquired the rabies virus, but rabies takes a while before it hits the central nervous system. So if one is able to give the vaccine, which is able to act upon that virus prior to it causing damage, then it will be efficacious. And potentially that's the same idea with people who may be infected in a year or 2 years' time from now with Corona-19. Maybe if they get the vaccine for it, then they would have better outcomes. Another thing I want to suggest with herd immunity is the global population has developed herd immunity to a number of diseases. Measles, mumps, rubella, and smallpox, because there has been, over the past, say, 50 years, vaccination campaigns to develop herd immunity, both in this country and globally. But vaccinations have started going by the wayside for a lot of individuals. We are now seeing an uptick in smallpox, which is problematic because now a lot of the global population is not immune to smallpox. There's not herd immunity, or our herd immunity is diminishing, if nothing else. And it has been argued that smallpox could be weaponized in the future to cause harm to populations. There is another movement of anti-vacciners, and it is based on thimerosal, which was included with the production of vaccines, specifically measles, mumps, and the rubella vaccine. There was some bogus articles put out in the Lancet Journal in the late 90s that suggested that thimerosal was causing autism. They stopped putting thimerosal in vaccines, and there continued to be a rise in autism. There have been a number of other studies suggesting that vaccines are completely safe, but because people are increasingly not getting vaccines, communities are losing their herd immunity. That is our trailer to acquired immunity, the adaptive immune system. Next video, we'll talk about how this immunity is actually achieved at the molecular level.